Thank you all for coming. And I'm very pleased that Sherry Turkle is joining us today for a conversation about her memoir, The Empathy Diaries. I just want to go over what the format is going to be. Sherry will read a short excerpt. Then we'll have a conversation between Sherry and me, and then we'll open up a Q&A. I encourage you to put questions and comments in the chat, although I can't really promise that I'll get to them all, but I will certainly try. In addition, if you're interested in further discussion about the book, we're going to have a regular CBE book group meeting tomorrow evening at 7:30 over Zoom, and I welcome anyone who's interested to attend tomorrow night to further discuss the book. So let me start now with the bio of Sherry. Sherry Turkle is the Abbey Rockefeller Bowsey Professor of the Social Sciences of Science and Technology in the program in Science, Technology, and Society at MIT. Also the founding director of the MIT Initiative on Technology and Self. Professor Turkle received a joint doctorate in sociology and personality psychology from Harvard University and is a licensed clinical psychologist. Professor Turkle writes about the, quote, subjective side of people's relationships with technology, especially computers. She's an expert on culture and therapy, mobile technology, social networking, and sociable robotics. Her newest book, The Empathy Diaries, a memoir, ties together her personal story with her groundbreaking research on technology, empathy, and ethics. Her previous book, the New York Times bestseller, Reclaiming Conversation, The Power of Talk in a Digital Age, investigates how a flight from conversation undermines our relationships, creativity, and productivity. Previous works include 4 other books about evolving relationships in digital culture. Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. Let me just admit 2 other people. Sorry about that. The Second Self, Computers and the Human Spirit. Life on the Screen, Identity in the Age of the Internet, and Simulation and Its Discontents. And 1 book about the history of psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic politics, Jacques Lacan and Freud's French Revolution. Turkle has also edited several collections on how we use objects to think with, particularly in the development of ideas about science. These include Evocative Objects, Things We Think With, Falling for Science, Objects in Mind, and The Inner History of Devices. Now I just want to read 3 short excerpts of reviews of the Empathy Diaries. The first from Dwight Garner in the New York Times. Sherry Turkle's memoir is a beautiful book. It is gravity and grace. It's inexorable as a fable. It drills down to the things that make a life. It works to make sense of existence on both its coded and transparent levels. It feels like an instant classic of the genre. Kirkus Reviews says, it's a near perfect melding of personal and intellectual memoir, a masterful memoir by a pioneering researcher and incisive thinking. And lastly, from the Jewish Book Council, these are among the judges' remarks. The Empathy Diaries was the winner of the 2021 National Jewish Book Award in autobiography and memoir. So the Jewish Book Council judges said, the Empathy Diaries is a gift, warm and witty, dazzling and humble, gutsy and intimate, a story rich in empathy after hardship and deprivation. She epitomizes interdisciplinary achievement, clinical psychologist, sociologist, and ethnographer. If the Times asks which 3 authors we would invite to a fantasy literary dinner party, Sherry Turkle would assuredly fill all three chairs. So with that, I will welcome Sherry, and why don't you start by reading an excerpt from your book, please?
Well, thank you very much. I'm sort of humbled by my reviews. I read all these reviews, but I never sort of read them all. It is very humbling. I just want to say it's lovely to be here, and it was really a wonderful experience to write and to publish this book, because it's one thing to have people say nice things about your ideas, but I think there's a kind of vulnerability in writing about your life. And when people like the way you tell your life or find meaning in the way you tell your life, I think that you realize when people liked it, how vulnerable you really were. And so I'm very grateful, not just that people liked it, but for the really the gentleness and the kindness in which even more critical voices have spoken to me. I think they sense that that there is a vulnerability with which I approached this project, and I think they've treated me actually with great empathy. And I've really deeply appreciated that. It's been really a lovely, which certainly wasn't true when I wrote about, Facebook and social media and social robotics and all the other things. It was more like the jungle. So I've decided to read to you really from the opening of the book, because the opening of the book sets up the story as a quest story. I'm looking for my father. Why am I looking for my father? Why was he hidden from me? Why have I not been able to use his name? It sets up the arc of the book, which is finding my father, finding my name. Why can't I find my father? Why can't I find my name? And the problematic nature of my mother, which is why has she kept these things from me? So essentially, these opening paragraphs sets up really the story of the book, the entire arc of the book, which is trying to make my peace with this circumstance. During the long hours of my grandmother's dying, I begin to read the Brooklyn telephone book. I look up the Charles Zimmermans. There are pages of them. I study the entries carefully. It's August 1975. I'm 27. For as long as I can remember, I've been both searching and not searching for Charles Zimmerman, my father, whom I haven't seen since childhood. Now I'm searching. In the back of one of my graduate school notebooks, I begin to copy down Charles Zimmerman addresses and telephone numbers, long lists of them. My mother is dead, and my grandparents, with whom I stay when I'm in New York, have only the Brooklyn telephone book, no Manhattan directory. I know that in Cambridge, Massachusetts, one of my Harvard professors has the Manhattan directory in his office. He once commented that everyone needs to have that directory at hand. At the time, this idea suggested a life of access and sophistication that thrilled me. Now, though, I feel a more practical need. When I get back to school, I ask his secretary if I may borrow his Manhattan book. She says no, but she lets me sit with it in his office, where I carefully copy out new Zimmerman candidates. My grandmother dies in December. At LaGuardia Airport, flying back to Boston after her funeral, my plane is delayed. Standing next to a payphone, I study the Queen's directory and copy down the information for all of its Charles Zimmermans. It never occurs to me that my father might live in the Bronx or have moved out of New York City altogether. Both during my mother's life and long afterward, I had respected my mother's wish to keep secret what she considered the great shame of her early divorce. I never spoke of my biological father. More than this, from the time I was 5 and my mother remarried, this was to Milton Turkle. My family lived under a regime of pretend. The rules were that although my legal name was Sherry Zimmerman, I had to say that my name was Sherry Turkle. I met with a private investigator, a former police detective. I no longer remember his name, just his thin black hair and shiny gray suit. In the spring of 1979, I visited his small, bare office on the west side, furnished with only a well-used lamp, a coat tree, and a steel desk. After Thanksgiving, the detective called. He thinks that he's found my Charles Zimmerman. I remember that as we spoke, I could only take shallow breaths. I was crossing a line. My mother had not wanted me to do this. Perhaps she'd had her reasons.
Thank you, Sherry. So let's get into the questions, some of which will address, at least indirectly, what you just read. To start with, could you tell us about the title of your memoir? It seems so apt, especially since it was completed during the first year of COVID. How did you come up with the title?
Well, I gave a lot of thought to the through line of what my work on technology and people had really been about. And my previous book, Reclaiming Conversation, I had almost called The Assault on Empathy, because the preoccupation of that book, and actually of the book before it, which was called Alone Together, which was a good title. But one of the through lines of that story as well was that somehow, although social media was supposed to knit us together, it was knitting us together in a way that I worried, given what I was finding in my interviews, in a way that was not necessarily keeping alive the kinds of conversations and the kinds of eye contact and the kinds of patience with each other in conversation that really are the ground, the groundwork for empathic conversation. And I worried about that. And I think that really, or, talk to a robot, talk to a chat bot, have a computer psychotherapist, it'll do some good. Well, of course you can have pretend empathy, or you can have something that can seem like a person, but it's not, in no way is it doing this job of being able to put itself in your place and having an experience, a bodily experience of what you're going through and all of these things, which is what human empathy is about. And people somehow were I would say, were not, in the interviews I was doing, were sort of not caring so much about that anymore. And the preoccupation with that question and whether technology was somehow desensitizing us to that question really was, the more I thought about it, the preoccupation with in my intellectual trajectory. And I wanted this memoir to be a memoir that drew together my personal life and my intellectual life. In other words, I genuinely do stop the story of my personal life and talk about Durkheim and talk about Jacques Lacan and talk about, this is a book of ideas. It's not just a book about my personal life. And so I tried to find a title that would do justice to the role that the lack of empathy and the quest for empathy had played in my personal life, and how I think it became a professional preoccupation. Um, I think my job is not just I think I don't just have a job. I think I have a passionate work calling. Um, and I think it comes from this very deeply rooted place in my personal life where I learned empathy because I was not shown empathy. So that's a long answer to your question, but it's the true answer that this notion of empathy really does honestly tie together my personal life and my professional life, which is what I wanted to do in this book. So for a long time, I knew that I didn't have quite the right title, but I knew that empathy was going to figure in the title of the book.
Mm. Thank you.
Someplace.
No, I think it's a very apt title, given how you combine the roots of empathy in both your personal life and professional life. So I think it's good. So to continue, please talk about the influence of the three women in your life: your mother, your aunt, and your grandmother, and discuss the influence of your early life in relation to male mentors in both your academic and personal life. So
Well, let
both,
me divide up this question.
well, it's probably better to have two questions. What is the influence of the women in your life?
Right, right,
The three women in your
right.
life, but then also the effect of your early life in you seeking out male mentors in both personal and your professional life later on.
Right. Well, let me just start out with the three. For Mother's Day, I posted a tweet on Instagram that we have, that we have. If you're lucky, you don't just have one mother, but you have people who mother you, who are nurturing to you, who love you. And I really had three women um, they used to joke that I was brought up by committee. Um, I had my mother, Harriet Bonowitz Turkle. My mother remarried Milton Turkle. So her full name was Harriet Bonowitz Zimmerman Turkle. The Zimmerman was the name that was the forbidden name that we never discussed, but she was. Uh, I'm 5'4". She was nearly 6 feet. She didn't want to be 6 feet. She didn't want to be she was tall, she was magnificent, she was imposing, but she wanted to be a petite woman because she thought that's what was feminine in those days. And so she was the kind of person who just kept changing her driver's license and explaining to the ladies at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles that she needed to be more petite in order to catch a man. And so by the end of her life, I have driver's licenses with my mother, where this 5'11", 6-foot woman is like 5'4", 5'5", and so it was just kind of crazy. But that's kind of how she was. She changed reality. She tried to make reality be more the way she wanted it to be, and she, through the force of her personality, she willed herself to be shorter. She willed herself to be. She willed me not to have the father I had, not to have the name I had. She willed us not to have had the marriage that had made me. But she was also someone who, when she became deathly ill, terminally ill with cancer, uh, that didn't suit her because she wanted to live a life of fun and frivolity not and not dwell on a devastating disease. And so she hid it. And I didn't know about it until weeks before she died. And this meant for her that I went away to college. I had always wanted to go to Harvard, to Radcliffe. And she knew that if I knew that she was ill, I would never do that. I would have stayed at home and in order not to leave her in her final years. And so she made this thing disappear from, anything that was shared with me. So she was just a force of nature. She was a force of nature, and I adored her. But you know, the book. She's a very problematic figure in my life and in the book because I was always angry at her for keeping my father from me and didn't understand. The book explains. I don't want to give away. I don't know how much of a spoiler alert to do, but the book explains her reasons of why she did that. But I obviously didn't know her reasons throughout my life. I didn't understand her reasons until after her death. And so she was a figure with whom I had tremendous conflict during her life, but I just adored her. My aunt was my role model. She was a brilliant woman. She was a reader. She was a theater goer. She was the one who encouraged me when I was sitting in Brooklyn and we didn't know anybody who'd ever gone away to college, not to mention ever gone to Harvard or Radcliffe. And I said, I want to go to Harvard. She said, absolutely. It was like no dream was too big. I mean, she just kind of gave me permission in a way to just be whoever I thought I could be. It was extraordinary because I'm trying to write something about her now, and she had no agency for herself. She had no feelings that she could do, although she had as many brains as I have. Believe me, she was brilliant. She was just a tremendously brilliant and creative mind, but she had no sense that she could do things to herself. But she had every sense that I could do anything I wanted. And she gave me that feeling. And I owe her a great deal. I owe her a great deal. And my grandmother was the center of our family. My grandfather was the one who everybody treated with kind of walked on eggshells around. He was very volatile. He was very temperamental. He was very powerful, and he was kind of the emotional driving force of the family. But really, it was a matriarchy, and the woman who got things done and held things together was my grandmother. And when my mother died, it was my grandmother and my aunt who were my rocks. And in terms of male mentors or seeking male mentors in my college career, it would really be wrong to say that I sought out male mentors, because when I got to Harvard, there were no women on the Harvard faculty except for one, Judith Sklar, and she wasn't in the field that I was studying. She was in political theory, and I wasn't studying political theory. I was envious of my close friends who were in political theory. One of my closest friends was in political theory, and she could be Judith Sklar's student, but I couldn't. So I was the student of male sociologists, David Reisman, Daniel Bell, George Homans, but I did not. It would not be right to say that I sought out male mentors. There were simply no women teaching any courses that I knew of at Harvard when I was there. So I wish I had had some female mentors when I was in college. It would have been very, very helpful to me. Later, I sought out women and became, I would say, very close with Jill Kerr Conway, who was the president of Smith. and who was a memoirist, and who encouraged me in the writing of this memoir. Later in my career, I tried to find women who I could connect with and be collegial, and I'm not sure it was always mentor relationships as it was. Jill was a mentor, but yeah, Jill was a mentor. But I sought out collegial relationships with women whenever I could.
Thanks, Sherry. So now my next question relates somewhat to the passage that you read. So many people, many of us who grew up in the 50s lived with family secrets, and we were essentially hostage to our parents curating our real lives. Now, many of us are on social media and we curate our online lives. So if one to discuss the similarities and differences and consequences of that. I don't know if that question is clear. It's basically how we present ourselves to others, that many of us growing up, parents made those decisions for us. Now we make those decisions on how we want to present ourselves on social media. And so what are the...
I love that question.
Oh, okay.
I love that question. I'm thinking about that question.
Okay, good.
I mean, that's a very rich question. I mean, I suffered from the fact that my mother, I love the word curated. She curated my father right out of my life. And she, when she remarried, she basically said, well, you had no other father except Milton Turkle. Milton Turkle, who she married when I was 5, and she had 2 children with him. She said, well, that is your father. And of course I knew he wasn't. I mean, it wasn't like I was one of these Arnold Schwarzenegger movies where I was put in some kind of machine. I mean, I knew that wasn't true. I knew all about my real, I mean, I knew I'd met my real father. I didn't have much of a relationship with him, but I had memories. But I was told that now I was to hide my books and papers because legally I still had to write the name Sherry Zimmerman in school until Milton Turkle adopted me. And I had to come home and hide them and lock them up so that nobody would see them. I mean, there was a whole thing that I had to do in order to hide who I was. And many years of psychoanalysis, you know, a lot of money spent on the costs of that curation because that was tough. And it was so, I mean, there are people on this call, Ivy Mansky's on this call, who I went to elementary school with. And, you know, I was Sherry Zimmerman, and then all of a sudden I was Sherry Turkle, or I wasn't Sherry Turkle, or we lied and said I was Sherry Turkle, but I was still Sherry Zimmerman. I mean, who did my mother think she was kidding? I mean, it was kind of like when I said that my mother had like some kind of reality disorder, or, you know, some kind of not quite connected to reality thing. I mean, did my mother really think that nobody knew that she'd been married before? I mean, it's like, but she did. You know, I mean, she put me through all that, even though, you know, we had a kind of class reunion that Ivy came to, and then we had one at Peninsula Hotel, and we organized another one. It was in my home, and I like interviewed the members of my 3rd grade class, like, hi, what did you think my name was? And I mean, there was like genuine confusion. There really was genuine confusion, but a lot of people really didn't know my name was Sherry Turkle, or never heard the name Turkle. I thought you were Zimmerman until I saw you on television, and then I saw that you kind of looked like Sherry Zimmerman, and I figured it out. And then some people always thought I was Sherry Turkle and had never heard of Zimmerman. Or I mean, it was really in my mother's head that she was doing this. It was really kind of in a way for her benefit. Um, so the whole notion that my mother lived in social media and was able to curate her Facebook page before such a thing existed is one of the reasons why I try to explain in the book that when I met social media and I saw people curating their reality, I said, "Oh, I know what this is. I understand. I understand the ups and downs of doing this." My mom would have really, she would have created a whole fake page for the Turkle family with fake pictures of me as a turkle when I was 2 years old, So I think that the notion of families creating the artificial histories that they want for themselves, really does predate social media. And now we just have a way to do it where, um, sort of everybody can. But I think that I think that one of the things that was so interesting to me is that there are many things about social media and the curation of self on social media that when I met them, I said, "Oh, I know what this is. This is mom." I've seen this before. I didn't, so it was very, my mom had an avatar. Uh, my mom had an avatar. She would have loved this. She had a, she was Harriet Zimmerman, but she had a Harriet Turkle avatar. I was Sherry Zimmerman, but I had a Sherry Turkle avatar. My avatar had a separate life from the real me. And then at night I went to sleep and put my avatar to sleep. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I know, I think it does. I mean, it's also the kind of question that, we could go on discussing it, but except that I have so many more questions that,
Right, but I mean, I think it's a good question, and that I think that that's part of what I wanted the memoir to do. Is I wanted the memoir to show that, families who kept secrets and who had these parallel stories were curating their lives long before Facebook.
right, right. No, I think it's worth contemplating. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit now. In your memoir, you mention the Vietnam War. I don't recall any mention of the women's movement of the late 60s and early 70s, also known as the second wave of feminism. So I'm wondering, did that movement affect you at all? And if so, how?
Yes, actually, it affected me a lot. It hit me not when I was at Radcliffe, but when I was in uh, uh, where I tell stories about um, not being able to use the library at Harvard, not being able to, we didn't have a place to go on the Harvard campus, and we just went to an underground room in Memorial Church where there was a kind of reading room, bathroom. It was the only place for Radcliffe students to read, and Harvard Yard. And all of this seemed completely natural. Um, and I talk a lot about, that you need to be, I call it dépaysement, you need to be taken out of your environment for what's natural to begin to seem unnatural. But when in 1965 and 66, these pre women's movement ways of being among men and in the male environment seemed completely natural to me. I just felt lucky to be there. And then it was really going to France and going to the University of Chicago and being in a women's group and 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 having all of that questioned, and then coming back to Harvard and why am I in the basement? Why am I in the basement of Mem Church? That's unacceptable. Why can't I have any of the fellowships? Why can't I belong to any of the clubs? it all just seemed what it was, which was a construct for exclusion and completely unacceptable. Completely, I mean, it was like flipping the switch. And it was what was so dramatic to me, and I really want to just give credits to Carol Gilligan here, who gets a zillion credits and deserves every credit, and I want to give more credits, is that, you know, I was a psychology major and I would try to get into psychology experiments, and they would say, no, you can't be in any of the psychology experiments because they're all for men only, because they're, kind of calibrated for men. And so we don't let women be in any of the experiments to earn money. And I just thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. That's natural. It makes a lot of sense to me. And it was Carol Gilligan who, at about that time, the early to mid 60s, saw that as a psychologist and said, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense at all. And I specifically mention this experience in my book because I want to make the point that I was no dummy. I mean, like, I was like the smartest. I mean, I was like the valedictorian of Abraham Lincoln High School, this like giant, this giant New York City public school. I had this giant IQ. I passed all these super tests. I mean, I was like certified smart, and I didn't see this. I was so embedded in a culture that could not see that. And I really make a point of making this point that I could not see that. That I was so deeply embedded in a culture where these things seemed natural, that not seeing these things did not mean that you didn't sort of have the brain power to get all A's or to be certified very smart. That you needed a kind of meta cognition, an ability to step out of that culture and see something really with fresh eyes. And really the genius of what Carol Gilligan was able to do at that point, which was that stepping out. And then once she stepped out, or once I went to France, or once I joined this women's group in Chicago, and then I looked back at it, I said, what do you mean the experiments are only calibrated for men? That's ridiculous. Women have a psychology too. I mean, we're just going to leave women out of all psychology, or this? I mean, it was so ludicrous. And of course, all of psychology changed in the years after. So I could have written a completely other book about my coming to feminist consciousness. And the original book had many chapters about this, and I decided it really is a separate book. It was weighing down, it was really kind of overwhelming, the empathy. It was overwhelming, the empathy book. So I just have, intimations about, kind of the change of consciousness about feminism. But I do make that point about how natural my place as a woman in the basement, not in the experiments, not being able to get prizes and fellowships, how natural that seemed to me, and what it took to really be part of a different culture.
Right. Yeah, you describe sort of a coming to a consciousness that many of us, went through it, during those years. So do you believe that you have to be of a certain age to write a substantive memoir?
I don't know. I know that for me, I needed to be not angry at any of the people anymore in my memoir. That was the criteria for me. And it took me a long time to be not angry at any of them, living or dead. That everybody, I had sort of made my peace with everybody. The ones that had perhaps wronged me in some way, I had taken the good uh, they had given me a lot of good, and I had really been able to appreciate the good that they had given me. Um, uh, I'd appreciated what my mother had gone through and what she had given me, and how difficult were her choices. I had an ex-husband who really had given me a terrible struggle, and I really had come to appreciate the gift of love and creativity and confidence in myself that he had given me. Uh, um, my grandfather, who'd been so cruel to my aunt, who'd been so harsh, I found, I realized how much he loved me and how much my good relationships with men had been based on this deep, deep love and physical affection and deep love he had for me. I was like the best thing in his life, and I knew it. So I really had made my, I really had a, not a loving relationship with everybody. And even my father, Charles Zimmerman, who really is the problematic centerpiece of my story. Um, I think he gave me a lot of his brains. I think he was a crazy guy, but I think he was a little bit of a genius. And I think I have a lot of his brains. And I'm very grateful to those brains. I think they served me very well. I think I was able to put my brains to better use than he was able to put his brains to use. And I think I tried to do him proud. And so I think that's what it took for me. What age was I when this happened? I don't know. I was a late bloomer, so it took me it took me a while. But I don't think it's. I don't really know if it's age as much as how long it took me to get to that place.
Right. No, it sounds like it's more the passage of time and the reflection during that passage and the introspection during that passage of time and whatever age you are when you can reach that
Yeah.
point.
I couldn't have done it before. I mean, I did it when I was ready to do it. I wasn't ready to do it before I did it.
Mhm. Thanks. In your memoir, you include many theoretical ideas. Those of French psychoanalysis and others. Why did you think that it was important to include the intellectual and theoretical aspect in your memoir, in addition to personal history?
Um, because I'm not a movie star. I'm not a um, if I was a when I read memoirs of other people, when I read, I mean, I was influenced by reading when I read John Lithgow's great memoir. I mean, he talks about his life, but then he talks about his life in the theater. I read Margot Jefferson's great memoir, and she talks about her life growing up as a Black woman, and then she talks about her ideas as a literary critic. I mean, I, I am a person whose life has been about making ideas, and what interested me was how to tell the story of the person behind those ideas. I don't weigh the book down with my theories, but I've always wanted to. I think it's interesting to know who the person is behind um, people who were passionately interested in their work. And I think that it's the book that I wrote the book that I would have wanted to read about somebody who had my ideas. I mean, I'm a woman who had, um, I think of myself as a woman of my generation who had uh, a passionate career, a career of passionate connection with her work. Um, and I didn't just kind of write a book about, I didn't just kind of do a couple of studies of, some kids and their computers, and then a couple of studies, I mean, I really, have tried to understand something about our deep connection with technology. And I wanted to answer the question of, well, who was the person behind that kind of work? So to not give some space to the ideas didn't seem right. On the other hand, I tried to keep it light because the books are out there. I didn't want to be, just cribbing from my books. So I reference them, but I don't talk at great length. But I talk a little. I talk a little.
Right.
I tell funny stories about Jacques Lacan. I talk about Lacan.
Well, I think actually, why did you just disappear? There you are. Okay, now I'm just, all of a sudden, you disappeared from my screen.
Hmm.
Sherry, you're still there. There you are. Well, I think many of the reviewers remarked on how well you melded your intellectual, the recounting of your intellectual pursuits along with your personal life. And now, speaking of reviewers, my next question: Dwight Garner, in an otherwise glowing review in the New York Times, said, "The Empathy Diaries, I am devastated to report, slides to an uncertain and unpersuasive ending." And he said this in an otherwise glowing review. Turkle attempts to bring the reader up to date with her life, but in a manner that seems evasive. She does not offer what one might call artistic resolution. So my question is, other than a brief mention of a second marriage and a little bit about your daughter, you write very little about those years. And so I'm wondering, was that to protect privacy? Is it still so recent that you're still reflecting on it? Did you not want to make your memoir overly long, or is it for a combination of reasons?
Well, I have such a crush on Dwight Garner ever since he wrote that review that I am like, how can I say anything but nice things about Dwight Garner? But he said that I basically, my book lives where the heart, and where the heart, the bone, the meat, the love, the gristle of human life lives. Dwight Garner is my favorite person. So not to disagree with him, but I really disagree. I love the way my book resolves, because the goal of my book, which I say in the beginning, is not to tell the story of my life. It's to say it's to take me from my babyhood to when I found my voice, as a theorist of technology and the self. It was not to take me, it was not to take me through my career. It was to show how someone could find a very particular voice, which was about being an intimate ethnographer of technology, and to discover and sort of invent that field, to give me full credit, to be a psychologist and an ethnographer, and to put those two things together, and turn them on the study of technology and the study of digital technology, and what it took to do that, and what that looked like, and how I got started, and what that meant. And that was my job in this book. It was not then to catch you up with the 20 years or the 25 years in which I did that, and give you kind of a potted history of all the things I found. And then I wrote this book, and then I wrote a different book, and then I wrote this one, and this one became a bestseller. And not at all. So I tried in the final chapter to say what I thought was important about having found that voice, which I think I found in The Second Self in 1984. which corresponded to finding my father, which was, I would have to say, I was literarily lucky that these things happened. That was just literarily lucky. Um, and then, uh, and then I felt it was important for the reader to know that I continued doing this, that I did it at MIT, that doing it at MIT meant that I got fired before I got rehired. In other words, it wasn't that wasn't a piece of cake, but that I stuck it out. So I give the reader a window onto that. And then I felt it was important because the book had been about my three mothers, and mothering and nurturing and caring, being loved as a woman by women. And I thought it was important that the reader know that I'd had a daughter and I had been a successful mother. I didn't think it was important for the reader to know really any other details about my personal story beyond that. And so I have a very uh, elusive reference, I think a very beautiful reference to the emotional and empathic quality of my relationship with my daughter, that I think is very beautiful and literarily quite beautiful. I would be happy to read it. I mean, I really worked on it, but I think it's beautiful. And I end the book with it. She's helping me choose a dress for her wedding, and I'm not sure of the dress. And I ask her, "Is the neckline okay?" And I ask her if the neckline is okay, um, um, and I say, and now Rebecca is 27. Only a few weeks before, she helped me choose the gown for her wedding. I had a favorite, but wasn't the neckline too low? Studiously, patiently, my daughter stood opposite me, putting herself in my place, taking me seriously. My empathic girl. No, she said, the neckline is perfect. And I just thought that was, I thought that was beautiful. So, Dwight, I think the author does not agree. Because sometimes you read a review, and you say, "Oh my God, I'm wounded." I'm just like, let me just take to my bed. I'm like, "You've got me, you've got me." I read it. I read that review and how he criticized me, and I thought, I don't think he's right. I think I nailed it. So I leave it to all you readers to decide for yourself. But I'm very contented with the choices I made. But in particular, I really didn't. This is not my life. This is not like an autobiography.
Mhm.
This is a story that really should end in 1984, and I bring it a little bit forward because I want to make sure that I got tenure, and I want to make sure that I kind of want to let in that I had a child.
Mhm.
I felt that I just felt that that was correct for the reader to know that I had a child.
Well, I think you mounted a very able defense.
Well, I mean, it's not really a defense. It's what was in the what was in the author's mind.
Explanation.
It's my thinking process.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. So now I'm going to do some other questions since this is sponsored by a synagogue group, book group. We always have what I call the Jewish related questions. So one is, how do you feel about the recognition that you received from the Jewish literary community by being the recipient of the 2021 National Jewish Book Award in autobiography and memoir? And then I have some follow-up questions relating to Judaism.
I'm so thrilled. What is it? I'm like so thrilled I'm so thrilled to receive that award. Louise Crawford knew about that award and got it organized to get 25 copies and some notarization that it was a really it was like this complicated application, and I was just like, oh, really? And then she would say, yes, we should do this. And I was like, okay. And I'm so happy that she did that, because when I won it, I was like, oh my God, I'm so happy. I'm so thrilled. I'm so honored. I'm so thrilled. It just feels like such a wonderful thing. It is such a wonderful thing. And then you look at all the books. I won against a memoir by Seth Rogen. I mean, it was like movie stars were competing. So it really was very exciting. And to be serious for a minute, in some ways, there are many things about the book that make it it's not a Jewish memoir. And I didn't set out to write a Jewish memoir, but there are many things about the book, in particular, the kind of closed, frightened environment in which my grandparents lived, in which every visitor to our home was, there were none, first of all, but they were kept at the door. And then, I was the one who kind of was sent at 5 years old. I was kind of the designated person to talk to them, because my grandparents were so frightened of the outside world because of some kind of echo of the Holocaust. Although they hadn't experienced it, they had heard about it, and there was this terror of outsiders, and after having grown up with that, really, I've just done a lot of thinking about the mark that's made on me, and of so many people who grew up like me in that environment, and really that it's a struggle very often for me to step into the world, even with all of the veneer of sophistication that I now have because of that background. I'm trying very hard when I have to step out into the world because of that background.
Well, that sort of dovetails into my follow-up question. So, how do you think your Jewish identity informed or didn't inform your intellectual pursuits over the years? And also, are you involved with the Jewish community presently in any formal way? And if so, how?
Well, I'm very involved with the Jewish calendar. I Seder's and Hanukkah, and I'm a very active, liturgically light, but there's a lot of liturgy and a lot of Jewish family holiday gathering. My home is a place of gathering for my friends and family around all of the holidays. So that would say that's my main. My daughter had a bat mitzvah and a Jewish wedding, and we do seders, and there's everything about that Friday nights, but I'm not a regular congregant at a temple, no. I would say I'm sort of temple shopping in New York. I go on the Jewish high holidays. I go to a temple on the Lower East Side that my grandparents, in fact, went to, um, whose name I'm forgetting right now, but it will come to me in a minute. And it's a very beautiful Lower East Side traditional service synagogue.
Mhm.
To me to go there. My grandparents went there when they were a young couple on the Lower East Side, and it's a it's definitely a senior moment that I'm not remembering the name of the temple.
Well, it'll
But I will in a minute. If you start telling me, if you somebody calls out the names of Lower East Side,
well, we'll get to that.
get to that in a minute.
Yeah, in terms of your intellectual pursuits over the years, do you think Judaism in any way has informed your intellectual pursuits, or not
Oh,
necessarily?
I think it's all. I think I just was born to be a Talmudic. I mean, I think I was in my book. I say that I was sort of set aside, not to cook. You know, my grandmother said she's not allowed to cook. She can't learn to cook. She can't learn to clean. She can't learn to. I wasn't allowed to do any chores. I was set aside to read. I mean, this may not be Jewish in the sense of the content of what I was reading, but I mean, I was set aside like a yeshiva boy,
Mhm.
uh, and told essentially that I was a yeshiva boy, despite my gender. Um, I was told that the cooking and the cleaning was for the girls. For the girls. I was a yeshiva bracha. I was set aside to be, uh, not to be bothered with the things of the world, since I would be I was to study. Uh, it was an extremely. Now I wasn't given Torah to study. I was given Hopalong Cassidy books and Nancy Drew books, and I mean, I was given other things to read. But I mean, I was Little Women, but I was definitely set aside to study the way you would set aside and they would call me yeshiva bracha. I mean, I was. It had a Jewish feeling to it. So I
Mhm.
think yes, that tradition of setting aside the eldest son
Mhm.
was very much in my background.
Right. Yeah, no, I remember reading that. I also remember this very touching scene in your memoir about your family dressing up and going to the temple steps.
Yes,
Maybe you just want to mention that.
yes, yes. There's a
That's
there's
a
a
very
lot of
touching scene.
yes. My family didn't have money, and they didn't. On the high holidays, you couldn't get into the temple unless you had a ticket. And so my family would go to the temple steps and stand on the steps before the services to greet our friends. And then my mother would say that we were going to her mother's house where we had tickets. We were going to be with her parents. And of course, we didn't have tickets. We just spent the day sitting in my grandmother's house eating, or on Yom Kippur not eating and waiting to eat. But we stood on the steps all dressed up, and it made a tremendous impression on me, and a kind of um, it was a very bad thing, actually. I felt, my mother felt like an imposter. um, I felt like an imposter, that we were going to be found out um, as not having tickets anyplace, that it was a shame. It was a, it was, it was a, it might have been a touching scene, but I don't think the inner life, I probably didn't adequately convey uh, the sort of anguish of the inner life of that experience. Um, the lack of money in my home was really not a problem in terms of food or, did I have enough clothes? Or I think I had plenty of clothes. I mean, I remember, you know, I, I always felt that I had enough clothes. I don't remember there being like a, you know, a, I felt like I had the right kind of clothes. I felt I had the right kind of food. I don't remember those things being sources of anxiety. But the fact that we couldn't get into this temple, oh, that was just terrible. It was so hard on my mother. I mean, I didn't, obviously, I didn't care, but I mean, and then I wanted to go to Hebrew school, and I didn't understand why I couldn't go to Hebrew school. And it wasn't until gradually it dawned on me that Hebrew school cost money. And I felt this shame that I had caused my mother to not be able to tell me the reason that I couldn't go to Hebrew school, because she would have had to say that we didn't have the money for Hebrew school. So there was the money thing. That I think that, one of the lessons of the book. People say, well, how did this book? I mean, a lot of times when people talk to me about books, what did this book teach you about child rearing? And I say, tell your children what's happening. I really learned, from this book to just talk to my daughter. If something was going on, I tried to like tell her what was happening. I didn't always succeed because the hard things are really very difficult to say, but I really made a big effort and then failed in some major areas. But it was my effort was to say what was happening. The fact that she couldn't say, Sherry, Hebrew school costs too much money. If you'd like to learn something about um, Hebrew knowledge, something, you got to find some other way to get you that information. Maybe there's a inexpensive course at Brooklyn College, because I took some courses at Brooklyn College. I remember a lot of the girls went to, a lot of my friends went to this dancing school, and I know it was expensive, and we didn't have the money to pay for that. And there was this course at Brooklyn College that my grandmother took me to, this dancing class that cost, I think, $5. And we took the subway to on Sunday. That I think was a way for me to have that experience without it costing a lot of money. So I think my mother tried to give me some of these experiences that she wanted me to have in a way that didn't cost money, but it was never addressed directly. And only now, when I was writing the memoir, did I realize, oh my God, that's why you took this ridiculous. That's why we took the train and the subway. That's why my grandmother took a bus and a train to come and take me, to take a bus and a train to go to Brooklyn College, and then take a train and a bus and a train, because we couldn't afford the dancing school in the local. It was 5 minutes away from where we lived. I mean, later in writing the book, I realized all these things. Money we just couldn't even discuss it. It was such a taboo. So.
Well, Sherry, thanks for sharing that. So I'm just wondering, is there anything that you wish you had included in your memoir, or you wish you had excluded from your memoir? And if so, could you share some examples?
Well, there was one thing I wanted to include, after a year of the book being out, the paperback came out, and I added a paragraph to the paperback. It's a little long to read, so I won't read it, but it essentially talks about my mother, because I felt that I hadn't uh, ever said in the book, I hadn't recognized in the book that essentially my father, I mean, here's the spoiler, is that she had found him when I was a little baby, doing experiments on me, kind of Skinnerian psychological experiments. And when she found him doing that, this is Charles Zimmerman, my biological father. When she found him doing that, she had some shopping bags from A&P. She put some diapers in them and some clothes. Her clothes, my clothes. And we left. She called her sister, my Aunt Mildred. We went back to my grandparents' house, and she never returned. She never returned to living with him again. That was the end of the marriage, and essentially she found a way to get divorced, and she tried to get him out of my life because she was afraid of him. She was afraid he was crazy. She was afraid he would hurt me. And then she was afraid in Judaism at that time that if people knew he was a little nutty, I've been told that I, as a daughter of somebody who had some kind of mental problem, would be unmarriageable. And for me to be unmarriageable was like, that was like completely not acceptable to my mother. In any case, she erasure was the only thing she knew to do. And she never told anybody about this. She never told her mother. She never told her sister. She never told me. I only found out about it because later in my life, I found my father. I discovered Charles Zimmerman because I find him through this detective. And he tells me this story about how she found him, how he offers her joint authorship in the scientific papers he's going to write about me. She's like horrified and she leaves. And he still doesn't understand why she left. I mean, he is kind of crazy. So when I find my father, I really lose him because I realize that I'm never going to have a father. But I also find my mother in a sense because I understand why she kept him from me. And I felt that in the writing of the book, I hadn't fully acknowledged that I was the only person who knew this story, that she had never told anyone this story about who Charles Zimmerman was. It was so horrible to her. And I had written the whole book and I had never sort of said that. And how alone she was. And so I added an acknowledgement at the end of the book that isn't in the hardback, where I talk about this. And I felt better after doing it. So I couldn't rewrite the book, but I was able to add a paragraph at the end where I more fully acknowledge this thing that I would have to say that I didn't really see. I didn't really see it until not only was the book written and completed, but I'd had a year to live with it, talk about it, live with it. So that's, and now I feel much better. I feel much better about the paperback as it makes its way in the world because I feel she's more fully acknowledged.
I think that is a great addition to the book. So what are some of the most important ideas that you want the reader to take away from the Empathy Diaries? And also...
Be nice to your mother. If Rebecca's listening, I'm teasing.
Are there anything else? Although that's enough.
That's enough. I'm about to become a grandmother, so I'm very. Let me think. If there's something I want you to, if I think in terms of, I think it's very good. I will just say this: that writing this book, as I think about what I want to do next, there's so many things I want to do next. I'm so upset about the world. I'm so upset about social media. I'm so upset about women I'm so upset about. I mean, I have this long list of things that I'm upset about. It's very hard. It's very hard as I begin to write other things to um, to match the emotional connection that I had with writing this book. And I really recommend that not everybody should write a memoir. I mean, I'm not saying everybody should stop what they're doing and write a memoir, certainly not. But I teach memoir. I teach a memoir to MIT students, and I see the difference it makes in their life after a semester with me of memoir writing. And I think it's very helpful to spend some time writing maybe 30 pages of the things that really stand out for you, that you want to make sure you remember about how you experience the most important relationships of your life. Because I think that doing that for me in vignette form and getting them down and getting them right, which is how I began. I began this memoir writing about Brooklyn Hospital and my mother's death and how I couldn't take the subway and how I could only take taxis and how I couldn't bear to go underground when she was dying. And I'm just the very specific things about her death and living in Paris and not being asked to clean windows and not knowing how to do it without and calling my grandmother. I mean, I just built it up from stories that were so important to me. It was such a meaningful experience. And so I think I just want people to maybe come away from the book and say, oh, I wonder what would happen if this book seemed so easy for her. These stories in the book are so down to earth. I wonder if I could do that too about my life. I would like people to do that. I would like people to say, oh, she tells very down to earth stories. I wonder if I could do that about my life. Mm. That would please me a great deal.
No, I think that's excellent advice. I'm wondering, do you envision a second volume of your memoir? And also, what are you currently working on?
I'm writing 2 books, one of which is about contemporary technology, and the other is a deeply personal memoir. And I'm writing them. It's a very interesting writing experience because I'm writing them both, and I'm sort of alternating days, and I'm finding that's very emotionally satisfying as opposed to going into this. Writing this book was a little bit like going into an emotional rabbit hole from which I was unavailable to. I really was emotionally unavailable for years on end, and so this kind of getting into these 2 modes of writing, and one of which is, one of which is sort of taking stock of where we are now in our relationship with technology and where I think we need to go next, and the other which is the other is a more personal book, is really working for me. I'm really enjoying my writing life.
Well, I personally look forward to reading both of them, and I think most of us here look forward to it as well. So I appreciate everyone's patience because we've run over because we've had a lot to discuss. And I also noticed early on that for some strange reason, there's no chat function. So you couldn't write your questions in the chat. But if you do have a question, I'd be happy to unmute you and you could ask a question. Because I'm not sure if I've covered everything. So just, I'm going to put it on gallery view so I could see people better. Just raise your hand. I know, okay, Janice, let me unmute you. And let me just see, can I unmute you? I have to figure out how to unmute you.
I think I am. I think I did it.
Okay, good. So
Okay.
do you have a question, Janice, that you'd like?
Hi, Sherry. I was sort of an hi, how are you? You look wonderful. You're a wonderful looking woman and an interesting book. I had a little observation and I wonder if I'm putting two things together that aren't related. I sort of had a feeling that maybe when you found your father, you lost your husband, Sydney.
Yes, well, there's a scene in the book actually where I say, and I try to do it in a very delicate way, but I think you probably picked it up, that I see them across the room and I see my batshit crazy father and my brilliant, eccentric, mad scientist, in a way, ultimate husband, 20 years older than me, sitting side by side. And I have a moment where I feel almost faint. And I meet Seymour's eyes. And later there's a moment in which he almost refers to it. And it's as though we understand in that moment that there's been some kind of shift, that I didn't need to see them together like that.
And one more thing, wasn't Sydney
So
also a lot like?
I don't know. I don't
Sydney?
know if I need it. I
Right.
I don't want to say.
Right.
I don't think I know more than that to say,
Right.
because I don't think there was anything more dramatic than that to say.
I understand.
But there was a moment that I try to capture in the book where that was a moment that I did
Okay.
have.
And wasn't Sydney a lot like your
Seymour.
mother?
Seymour.
I'm sorry? Seymour. Wasn't he a lot like your mother in the fact that there was whole parts of his life that you didn't know and that he didn't think was important for you to know, and he curated his own life in a way.
Yes.
If we use that word.
Seymour was actually in every way like my mother. You know, he had a fantasy life. He made reality that's a very perceptive comment. I think that Seymour was very much like my mother.
And they both loved you. That was the other thing. They clearly both loved you.
I feel that Seymour loved me very much. And I try in this book.
Yes, you do.
I try in this book, even though, this marriage was was not a success.
We've all had them.
I really tried to communicate that I felt very deeply loved by him, and I try to be as really respectful as you can be to somebody who cheated on you that badly. I try to be as because he gave me a tremendous amount. I mean, he really gave me a tremendous amount.
You did a wonderful job. It was a great book, and thank you for answering my question.
Thank you very much.
And I see Muriel has a question, and then after Muriel, Marvin. So let's, I think Muriel, I think you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, please continue.
Hey, I wanted to thank you so much for this book. I was so moved by it, and I have followed your work for years. Particularly the idea of family secrets, and I think you're being able to sort of hone these abilities to understand beyond words, without words. It doesn't always go that way, and that it's just very, very powerful. The other thing for me is that we're almost exactly the same age, and I grew up in Brooklyn.
Oh,
And I'm a psychoanalyst and clinical psychologist. And the references that you make to what life was like, the sort of details of shopping on Fulton Street or Fred Braun's sandals and stuff, was so richly evocative for me, having grown up. I went to Lafayette High School and all of that, so that it really was such a rich experience. The other thing that is sort of funny to me is that, having read your other works, I had this fantasy that you must be, of course, leading a charmed life, a perfectly charmed life, where everything went smoothly and you only made the best decisions.
I don't know why.
Well,
I don't know. Maybe that's the point of writing. Maybe that's the whole point of why you should write a memoir, is that.
Well, it was very interesting to me anyway, to read that. And I was extremely moved by the book, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, maybe that's a good thing about writing memoirs, is we should all learn that everybody else isn't leading charmed lives. I don't think I believe in charmed anymore. I think that one thing I've learned very recently in writing this book is I've learned that my work has really been a companion to me, and a sustenance to me. Because somebody was interviewing me and said, "Well, you've had such a turbulent life. Aren't you miserable? Aren't you lonely?" I was like, and I realized that I think that that one of the gifts of having work that's very sustaining is that you come to appreciate that actually your creativity and your work has, really has been a sustaining and stabilizing force. And I think that has been, that's something I'm interested in writing about in the future. I don't think that's written about enough in the lives of women, in a way that I've been able to recognize, but not in a romantic way, not in a way that makes it seem like, La La Land, but just in a realistic way that for many women, in particular, one's work has, takes on that role. And, things in my work life have been very stable. And I think that the memoir shows that, Seymour's in Tunisia, I have, but while all that's going on, I say, well, my marriage is falling apart. I know what I'll do. I'll write a book. There really is a section of the book where I'm talking about this marriage falling apart, but I'm coming up for tenure. And I basically say, I think I'll finish my book. And I go to the beach. I go to Annisquam, which is where I had a little, like, a one-room shack that I was renting. And while Seymour is off, God knows what, I start to write about children, and I call them child philosophers, and whether they think computers are alive or not alive. And I'm writing about how Seymour is like all over the world and he's screwing around. His daughter is in tears because he's not doing this and he's not doing that. And he's promising he's going to Australia, but really he's going to, I mean, he's like spinning out of control. And I'm just going to the beach every day interviewing these children. And it's all juxtaposed. And you can see, if you actually look at that section, of how I'm going to live my life when things don't go well with men. I'm going to be sitting in my computer writing my book. So I mean, actually, if there are intimations in this book about how I'm going to create a life of stability for myself, even when things are not, as I wish they were in my personal life.
Thanks. Now, I think Marvin had his hand up before. Marvin, you want to unmute yourself?
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Following Muriel's thought about being brought up in Brooklyn, I was brought up in Brooklyn, but my mother's name was Harriet also. I've learned a lot from your book, Sherry, a lot about you, but really a lot about myself, which I suppose is really what was the most important. But the thing you just mentioned before about being emotionally unavailable, that also was something in my life. And I'm curious with you, at what point did you become emotionally available, or did you just one day realize that you are now emotionally available, or are you emotionally available?
Oh,
now?
I was saying that when I write a book, I was laughing, and I think I wasn't clear. I was saying that right now I'm about to become a grandmother, and it's very important to me to be very emotionally available to my daughter and to my new granddaughter, and I was reflecting that while I was writing the Empathy Diaries, it would be fair to say that there were months in which I was really deep in my inner life. It was COVID. It was the pandemic. I was traumatized. I was reliving something about my childhood. I was very not emotionally available, the most emotionally available person, I would say. And now I'm trying to say that I'm trying to develop a way of writing where I'm a little bit less, into my reverie. That's what I was trying to say. Is that clear? I'm not allowing myself this kind of, I'm disappearing into my childhood reveries. I don't want my granddaughter to, I want to be there I want to be really very much more emotionally present than I was during the writing of the trauma chapters of the Empathy Diaries. That's what I was trying to say.
In retrospect, do you feel that you were emotionally available in a lot of your relationships when you were younger?
With
other people in general?
I couldn't answer that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I did my best. I was in therapy. I think I tried my best, and I always was in therapy to try to do not just the best I could, but to do better than the best I could. I think there's a very funny scene in this book where I'm trying to be in a relationship with Seymour Papert, who is really a challenge, and I'm in psychoanalysis. And in order to be in a relationship with Seymour, I'm lying to my psychoanalyst about what's going on, because I know my psychoanalyst is like really not going to like what Seymour Papert is what Seymour Papert is doing. So I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I'm crying happy tears. I'm laughing. It's so funny. So I'm lying to my psychoanalyst, who I'm paying a lot of money, about what's going on, because I really want to marry Seymour Papert. I am compelled to marry this man. I am going to marry Seymour Papert. But I'm in the psychoanalysis and I can't tell my analyst what's going on in this marriage because it's like completely unacceptable. I know I'm at training to be a psychoanalyst. I know that this is not okay. So I'm lying to my psychoanalyst. I'm going to marry Seymour Papert. And after a certain amount of time, I quit the analysis because, you know, the marriage means more to me than being in psychoanalysis. And then after the marriage starts to devolve, I go back into analysis and I start a real analysis in which I commit to tell the truth as best as I can. So, I mean, there are moments when my efforts to be in analysis and sort of, be the best I can be, get in the way of my commitment to the relationship I was in. That was the example that comes to mind. I think it's a very truthful moment in the book, and I think it's a very honest and poignant moment in the book.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. So before we end, any other last minute questions? Okay.
I really want to thank everybody for their, for the openness and honesty and engagement of your questions. This has really been something. I mean, this audience has really got into it. This is not your usual questions. This is like, what did you think about the bad things the reviewer said? Were you committed in your relationships? I mean, this is hardcore. I appreciate this. I appreciate the level of commitment here. This is.
Well, we try to dig deep.
You're definitely digging deep. You are digging deep.
All right. Well, I know Janice, you had, and I guess no one else has raised their hand. So Janice, you'll have one more quick opportunity.
Okay.
Wait, you have to. Okay, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Oh, all right. So I have 2 grandchildren that recently graduated college. I have a 84-year-old boyfriend. Anybody I ask, nobody has ever heard of ethnography.
Ethnography?
Yes, what you
What I do. Nobody's heard of it.
What is it? I try to understand it.
It's a fancy word for what anthropologists do, which is to go into the field and ask questions and hang around and be a fly on the wall, and it's just a fancy word for hanging out, being a fly on the wall, and interviewing people. And
okay, I got it.
So if you say you're an ethnographer, it means if you're a business ethnographer, you go into a company, you go to their meetings, if you're an ethnographer of a primitive society, you live in their huts,
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Anyway, Sherry, this was wonderful. I think everyone really, appreciates your honesty and discussing your memoir. So I'd really like to thank you for joining us.
pleasure.
That we all really appreciated the discussion, and this was great.
Well, I really, like I say, I really appreciate your level of engagement and commitment and your willingness to, to ask tough questions. And I've really tried to give it I've really tried to honor you back by giving it my best, my best efforts. I really have.
Give it your Brooklyn due, because this is Brooklyn.
Brooklyn. It's
Brooklyn.
Yeah, this was good. Well, I need to do a few other thank yous. Of course, the first and the biggest goes to Sherry, but I also want to thank the staff at Congregation Beth Elohim, especially CBE's Director of Engagement, Karen Gerwin, and also a special thanks to Nate Jaffe, who's the CBE clergy assistant. I want to thank everyone who attended today, CBE book group members, CBE members, and also community friends. And please let your friends and relatives know that this has been recorded and that I'll be sending out the link. The link will also be posted on the CBE website. In addition, if you'd like a further opportunity to discuss the Empathy Diaries, we're going to have a meeting tomorrow evening via Zoom at 7:30. And if you're not already everyone will be getting everyone who attended tonight will be getting a follow-up email. And in the follow-up email, I'll include the Zoom link for tomorrow night's meeting. So even though, you might not ordinarily attend, you're certainly welcome to join us tomorrow night if you have, additional thoughts or that you want to express about the Empathy Diaries. So once again, thank you all. I hope you all have a great week. And please keep reading. If you haven't already read the Empathy Diaries, I heartily recommend it. And until next time, thanks. And thanks again, Sherry.
Bye-bye.
Bye.